video on this channel if you're new here. Hi, my name is Lillian and I like to talk about books, and if you also like to talk about books, feel free to subscribe. We can talk about books together. Okay, in my quest next year to read more of the nonfiction books that I have accumulated on my shelves, these ones in particular, I thought I would make myself a little TBR of the 10 nonfiction books that I'm most excited to get to next year, the ones that I am rearing to read, chomping at the bit to read, so to speak. These books are from a variety of different topics, and I think the key to finding nonfiction that you enjoy is finding books about topics that you are already very interested in or want to learn more about. I used to read a lot more nonfiction for my undergrad degree, both assigned reading and personal reading, and that's something that I've kind of drifted away from in the last several years, and something that I would really like to get back to. So without further ado, let's get into the meat of the video and the 10 nonfiction books that I am very excited to get to next year. First up, we have Fight Like Hell: The Untold History of American Labor. This is by Kim Kelly, who is an independent labor journalist as well as a columnist for Teen Vogue, of all places. This book explores the countless silenced, misrepresented, and forgotten leaders of the American labor movement. It's an exploration of those leaders as well as an overarching history of the American labor movement and how the rights that American workers enjoy today, like the weekend, like lack of child labor, were fought in many ways with blood, sweat, and tears in order to be achieved. So I think this will be a very important read and one that I'm definitely excited to get to. Next on the list is The Oracle of Night: The History and Science of Dreams by Siddhartha Ribeiro, and it is translated from the Portuguese by Daniel Hahn. This is described as a groundbreaking history of the human mind through the experience of dreams. And also, can we just have a second for this cover, which is really, really stunning. Chef's kiss. Ribeiro's investigation into this topic encompasses literature, anthropology, religion, and science, and explores the essential place that dreams have occupied throughout human history, and how they often functioned as a catalyst that compelled us as humans to transform our earthly habitat into the human world. Next on the list is this little beauty, Extreme North: A Cultural History by Bernd Brunner. I believe that's how you say his name. It is translated from the German by Jefferson Chase. This book reportedly addresses the romanticized and sometimes fantastical understanding of Scandinavia, Iceland, and the Arctic that exists within the Western psyche. Brunner looks to highlight the cultural and political fictions that are largely at play about these different places, including the elevation of Nordic phenotypes by racists and eugenicists, and its subsequent influence on America's immigration policy, as well as the idealization of Scandinavia's social democracy as a supposed post-racial utopia. Brunner traces back the history of crackpot Nazi theories tying a supposed Aryan race to these areas of the world, and how that has had an impact on a lot of modern pseudoscience fantasies of racial and cultural superiority of people from these places. This looks like it will be a relatively short read, but I'm hoping that it will be rather impactful. Next up we have Sovietistan, which I don't trust myself to read the rest of this title without looking at it, so I will do that. Sovietistan: Travels in Turkmenistan, Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, and Uzbekistan by Erica Fatland. I apologize for my probably butchering of the pronunciation of these nations' names. The first edition of this book originally came out in 2014, but was translated from the Danish, I believe, into English by Carrie Dixon in 2020. Erica Fatland takes readers along for her solo journey through a number of these countries, how their Soviet heritage has influenced them, and the trajectories that they have taken post-Soviet collapse in 1991 and becoming sovereign nations again. I don't think I've ever read any travel nonfiction before, so I'm really excited to delve into this. This is definitely an area of the world that I don't know much about, though I am also very interested in the history of the Soviet Union, so I think I will definitely learn a lot of new things as well as tie in some things to my pre-existing knowledge. Next is a book that I have been talking about reading for quite a while, and next year is the year I'm finally going to do it, and that is The Lonely City: Adventures in the Art of Being Alone by Olivia Lang. This book originally came out in 2016 and is an essay collection that chronicles Lang's time in New York during her mid-30s, where she found herself confronting loneliness on almost a daily basis while simultaneously being surrounded by millions of other people in the same city. Lang reportedly explores this emotion through various different modern art pieces, explores what it means to be alone, eliminating its causes, and also how it might be resisted as well as redeemed. I think I own 3 different Olivia Lang essay collections at the moment, and I have yet to read one of them, and I have wanted to start with this one for quite a while, so 2023, coming for this book. Next up is another essay collection, and that is White Magic by Alyssa Washuta, who is a member of the Cowlitz Indian tribe, and this came out in 2021. This is a series of autobiographical essays chronicling her journey through years of abuse, struggling with addiction, PTSD, and misdiagnosis of bipolar disorder, and eventually making it to a place where she started reconnecting with her ancestral spirituality and heritage, and using that as a conduit for deep healing in her life from past traumas. The description of this book also notes that it is a critique of a lot of New Age spirituality practices. Let me rephrase that. Capitalist money grabs disguised as New Age spirituality that tend to appropriate a lot from indigenous cultures and spiritual practices. Things like starter witch kits with sage, rose quartz, and a tarot deck all bound up in plastic. Marketed spirituality that claims to be a gateway to finding a better, more spiritual version of yourself, but at the end of the day is really just a money grab for capitalism. Washuta apparently explores a lot of questions around cultural inheritance and spirituality in this book, and I am really looking forward to reading it. For number 7 on this list, we have Dreaming in French, the Parasiers of Jacqueline Kennedy, Susan Sontag, and Angela Davis. This is by Alice Kaplan and came out in 2012. This book is apparently a look at how the iconic city of Paris influenced and changed the lives of these 3 very iconic women, looking at the remaining effect that Paris had on these 3 women who are from very different backgrounds, but who all later rose to social prominence and levels of fame. Kaplan chronicles their time in Paris before any sort of fame came into their lives, their subsequent discoveries in the city, their adventures, the people that they met, the friends that they made, and the loves that they had. I myself was definitely struck by Paris when I got to visit briefly when I was studying abroad in 2016, and it is definitely a city that I want to revisit, and for the meantime I would love to read more about the city and its effect on people. Angela Davis is one of my favorite scholars and activists. Jackie Kennedy is a household name, and Susan Sontag is definitely a nonfiction academic writer that I've been hearing a lot about recently, and I'm really looking forward to checking out her work. Next is a history nonfiction book that I'm really excited to get to, and that is Hell and Good Company, The Spanish Civil War and the World That It Made by Richard Rhodes. This originally came out in 2015, and I think I picked it up around 2017 or so. At the moment, I have little to no knowledge of the events and the themes and the causes of the Spanish Civil War, and that's something that I wanted to fix, knowing that it is one of the first instances of a fascist takeover of a government. Rhodes apparently approaches the story of the Spanish Civil War through reporters, doctors, writers, and activists who witnessed it during its occurrence, and the idealism to defend democracy against the rise of a fascist regime in Europe right before the outbreak of World War II, at a time when Europe as a whole seemed to be teetering towards this new political movement of fascism, and how the Spanish Civil War and the fall of democracy in that country inspired and haunted a lot of the creative minds of the day, including Ernest Hemingway, George Orwell, Pablo Picasso, Joan Miro, Martha Gellhorn, etc. So I'm hoping that this will be a good overview and introduction to this event in history, from which I think I would like to delve further into. Next up is quite a short little read, though apparently there are 12 essays in here. This is Whiteness is Not an Ancestor, Essays on Life and Lineage by White Women, and this is a collection of essays edited by Lisa Iverson and came out in 2020. And I think I need to read a little bit of the blurb on the back of this book in order to do it justice. For over 2 decades, family constellations facilitator and therapist Lisa Iverson has been working with groups, including the descendants of those who have perpetrated harm or have been victimized in circumstances of injustice. Here she brings together a collection of essays written by white women on the role of whiteness in immigration, colonialism, slavery, and war. Their stories disentangle themes of innocence, grief, race, privilege, and belonging in their families and ancestries. I don't think I've ever come across a piece of nonfiction like this where white women are examining their role in whiteness and racism, but I'm really glad that I have a copy of this, and I'm definitely looking forward to reading it, and I hope that more nonfiction like this is able to be published in the future. And the last book on this list is The Unwomanly Face of War, an oral history of women in World War II by Svetlana Alexievich, and it is translated from the Russian by Richard Pivier and Larissa, I'm gonna butcher this name, I'm so sorry, Volkonsky, I think is how you say it. The original of this book came out in 1983 but was not translated into English until 2017. And I actually have a little bit of a personal story related to this book. So I was a history major in college, and during my sophomore year I was writing a paper for one of my Russian history classes about Soviet women's experience in combat and on the front lines. The USSR was the only nation to have women in combat roles during both World War I and World War II. And the paper that I was writing was looking at and comparing the propaganda and official Soviet policy of having women in various combat positions, as well as a lot of the propaganda and rather progressive policies that were being implemented in regards to women in the Soviet Union. In the early days of the Soviet Union, things like offering women free childcare so it would be easier for them to go and work outside of the home, full and free access to abortion, as well as the ability to divorce their husbands if they so chose, and how the recruitment posters for a lot of Soviet military during this time were very much in favor of having women in their ranks, saying that their place was on the front lines of the war and that they deserved just as much heroism and resources as all of the male soldiers that they would be fighting alongside, and comparing that to the subsequent backtracking that the Soviet government, as well as a lot of the propaganda, had over the course of the war on a lot of their progressive policies, as well as their sort of outlook on women's role within the Soviet Union. Their tune sort of changed to be that women's place should be in the home, making a good home for the male returning soldiers, and then after the war making sure that they were giving birth to lots of children in order to fulfill their role within Soviet society. So for that paper I was looking into a lot of official Soviet documentation, propaganda posters, and I was also looking for first-hand accounts, primary sources of women's experience fighting on the front lines during mainly World War II, and how they saw this change and specifically how they were treated after the war. I think the majority of them went in with so much hope and promise that they would get to fulfill their duty to their country, but unfortunately they faced a lot of resistance and misogyny within the ranks of the Russian army, as well as when they returned home. They were seen as morally compromised women, that they only went into the army to be sexually promiscuous, horrible things like that, and how a lot of the female combat veterans ended up having to hide their service record in order to be reaccepted back into Soviet society. Okay, back to this book. So when I was researching for that paper, I came across the title of this book and thought it would be a great source for that paper, but it hadn't been translated into English at that point, and I was so disappointed. Come to find out that this book, and I think some of the diaries that I had been looking to use, have finally been translated into English. This was translated into English in 2017, 2 years after I needed it for that paper, but I'm still definitely excited to read about the experiences of these women in various areas of Soviet society and their experience with the Second World War. Okay, that is it, my friends. Those are the 10 nonfiction books that I am really excited to get to in the coming year. I would love to hear your thoughts about them in the comments below. Also, let me know, do you like to read nonfiction? And if so, are there any nonfiction books that you are really excited to get to in the coming year? You can like this video if you liked it. That apparently helps, and I really appreciate you being here, and if you would like to see more from me, feel free to hit that subscribe button. Stick around. But I think that is all from me today, my friends. Thank you so much again for watching, and I will see you in my next video. Bye.